Hello, I'm Melissa with the SAG-AFTRA Foundation. Thank you for joining us for today's The Business Program. The SAG-AFTRA Foundation has a COVID-19 relief fund that supports SAG-AFTRA artists with basic needs like rent and food and healthcare costs during this global pandemic and industry shutdown. Donations are 100% tax deductible and directly support performers in dire need. You can find out more information by looking in the description of this video. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, director and co-producer, Sam Fader.
Hi, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm very excited to speak with you all today, and thank you to SAG-AFTRA for hosting this conversation and giving me the opportunity to chat with some of the extraordinary people who helped make our film Disclosure. For those of you who haven't seen the film, Disclosure shows the ways in which film and TV have taught us all, both trans and non-trans people, like how to think of trans lives. You know, who we are, who we can be, what we do, and our place in the world. And when you look at the past 100 years of footage, you can see how those images have been pretty distorted. And, you know, most of us in the world know what it's like to be misrepresented. But imagine when dehumanizing representation is the norm for you. And that's how it's been for trans people. And that's taught many non-trans people what to think about us, and it's taught us how to feel about ourselves. And even with this horror of the history, there's still so much joy and nostalgia in revisiting the clips as we do in Disclosure. You know, the film really takes the viewer on a vastly emotional ride of laughing and crying. And that's because it's rooted in the lived experience of our cast, who have all shown up with such generous, open hearts and willingness to be vulnerable. And there was just so much trust in making the film, and it was such an honor to be able to make it with the 31 people that appear in it. You know, we can all agree that the film was really urgent to make because as we continue to see a celebrated increase of trans visibility, there's also a rise of social and legislative violence. And we know that the way we learn about people impacts how we treat them, right? So how does representation, for better or for worse, normalize the conditions of our lives and how we see each other, right? How does seeing violence and shame over and over in response to a trans body influence the audience, right? So to think about these questions and many more, we have Laverne Cox, the executive producer of Disclosure, and one other of our stars, Candis, Cayne. I'll just briefly introduce the both of them and then we'll jump into a conversation. So Laverne Cox is a 4-time Emmy-nominated actress, Emmy-winning producer, and a prominent equal rights advocate. Laverne's groundbreaking role of Sophia Bursette in the critically acclaimed Netflix original series, Orange is the New Black, brought her to the attention of diverse audiences all over the world. This role led to Laverne becoming the first openly transgender actress to be nominated for a Primetime Acting Emmy and made her the first openly trans woman of color to have a leading role on a mainstream scripted TV series. Laverne is currently in production on a Shonda Rhimes 10-episode limited series called Inventing Anna for Netflix. She recently appeared in the romantic comedy Can You Keep a Secret? And Laverne's upcoming films include Justin Simeon's Bad Hair and Promising Young Woman. Candis Cayne. In 2007, Candis Cayne was cast in the groundbreaking role of Carmelita Rayner on the hit ABC primetime drama Dirty Sexy Money. She portrayed a trans woman who's in love with the New York Attorney General Patrick Darling, played by William Baldwin. She became the first out trans actress to play a reoccurring starring role on a network television series. And by doing so, she broke down barriers, creating a path for her community to follow. Cayne has also reoccurred on shows from Nip Tuck to the CBS show Elementary, Drop Dead Diva, and Necessary Roughness. So there's history, there's legacy. We've all known each other for a long time. I think that's part of the beauty of our community, and it comes through in our film. Laverne, I also know that before you and I even met, this was a passion of yours. I know you traveled around to the college circuit and gave lectures on the history of trans representation. Can you talk a little bit about why you've been so passionate about telling this story?
I think it's that piece of how narratives are constructed, and then how do we continue to have conversations? What I was specifically interested in prior, I've always been interested in the history in film and television, but I've been doing a presentation for a couple of years that focused on TV talk shows. And I started with Christine Jorgensen, sort of, getting off the plane in 1953, that big sort of press conference. In 1952, Christine Jorgensen became world famous when the New York Daily News wrote an article, I think the headline was ex-GI becomes blonde Jane. And that headline and the way in which Christine Jorgensen was sort of talked about, when you think about that headline, ex-GI, this sort of, we think of GIs as, sort of macho men, becomes blonde beauty, and blonde beauty. So this that sort of dichotomy of going from this before and after and this sort of macho to femme thing became the way that we talked about trans people really for 60 years. And you can begin to trace through Christine Jorgensen and through TV talk shows in terms of how certain questions were being asked of trans people, that they were attempting to sort of reinforce that narrative over and over again. So that's one area that I was interested in. Of course, I'm an actress and I'm obsessed with media and how media can change hearts and minds. And I've been so blessed to experience that in my own career, I've experienced it, watching Candis Cayne, and do that. It's really throughout, my New York life. Candis Cayne was a fixture in the New York club scene, and I always looked up to Candis and admired her. And in 2007, when Dirty Sexy Money aired, it literally opened up a whole world of possibility for me. I've been acting for years, and going to acting school and doing off-Broadway theater and student films for free, and wanting to have a career as an actress. And when Candis had her moment, she made me believe it was possible. And so representation can change people's lives. I literally wouldn't be here if it weren't for Candis Cayne. And so here we are with Disclosure, with this film that has impacted people in such a beautiful way. I get to share a space with Candis Cayne and, sort of sing her praises publicly. Not that I haven't been doing it my entire time in the public eye, but it's just really beautiful and special to get to, yes, look at the legacy of disparaging and dehumanizing representation, but also begin to vision what the possibilities are. Right, that we can assemble, 31 trans people on camera who are working in film and TV right now. It's a beautiful thing.
Laverne, I think it's so interesting and inspiring when you talk about your story of seeing Candis and how that propelled your career. And I think, I wish you had seen something like that 20 years earlier, right? And that really speaks to a casting issue that we're going to revisit later in this conversation.
I was 35 years old when Dirty Sexy Money premiered, right? So I'm 35 years old. Like, I've been in New York. I moved to New York in 1993 with all my big dreams. And that was the first time I saw a character that I felt reflected who I was.
Right.
First time.
Powerful.
35 years old.
It's really powerful. And, imagine you grew up seeing that. Like, how would that have changed your life, right? It's just, it's just like, that's such there's so many reasons to talk about casting issues, but that story in itself just speaks volumes. In particular, because this is a SAG panel and, there's a lot of actors on it, I would love if you would talk a little bit about what you did, and how that affected your career. So you saw, take us back to that moment. You saw her, and then what happened, and what did you do?
Honestly, I would love, Sam, I'm sorry, I would love to hear from Candis about how she was cast in Dirty Sexy Money and all the casting issues over the years that she's experienced. I'm sorry, I'm going to totally just
Okay, I'm going to get to that. That was going to be my next. I wanted you to kind of elaborate on your story.
Okay. I just feel like I'm talking so much, and I want to hear Candis.
Yes, don't worry. I'm an equal opportunity question asker, but I did want the audience to get a sense of that story, and then I was going to ask.
Absolutely.
Thank
you so much. I remember I was having some voice problems at the time, and I went to this doctor who happened to be a trans woman. She was a laryngeal surgeon, and it was about 2 weeks before Dirty Sexy Money came out, and she's like, "You know what's happening in 2 weeks, right? Dirty Sexy Money, Candis Cayne." It was one of those things. It was one of the. I don't know if you were aware of this, Candis, but the whole community was buzzing about it. Everyone was excited. I was excited. Everyone was excited. We knew it was happening. There was this sort of fervor and this sort of buzz about it. I was at the doctor's office, and a random doctor was like, "Dirty Sexy Money, Candis Cayne, it's history." No, really, 2 weeks before. And so the night it premiered, I was sort of perched, in my 315 square foot studio apartment in New York. And then that moment happens when you open your mouth and your voice, I remember being very jarring, and it was just weird. It was so weird, but what was so beautiful about the storyline is that, the show is a soap opera. So in the Darlings were just, really effed up kind of family, right? And Candis's character Carmelita was having an affair with Billy Baldwin, Patrick Darling, and he was a state senator, and he was married, and so she's like the mistress or whatever. But what was beautiful was their chemistry. What was beautiful is that she was a human being. She was a full human being. She was beautiful. She was elegant, and she was trans, and she was on TV, and it was just, I had just never seen it before. I never seen. God, it's just so. It's just deep. Like when I go, I just got goosebumps. I'm like, I just never seen a like just looking beautiful and well put together. I just never seen it before. And it changed everything. And I said, this is the moment. I said, this is the moment for me. I went out and I made 500 postcards. I said, Laverne Cox is the answer to all your transgender acting needs. I sent the postcards to 500 agents and casting directors, and I got 4 meetings. One of them was with my current manager, Paul Haleppo. And I wouldn't have put the postcards together. I wouldn't have believed it was possible if Candis hadn't been on television. It literally changed the trajectory of what I did. And the next year, because I finally had an agent, I booked my first Law & Order. I booked my second Law & Order. I did my first HBO show. I did a reality show called I Want to Work for Diddy. It was like, I said, I'm going to say yes to everything. I remember being this is 2007. So I was very intentional. I was like, I'm saying yes to everything. I started submitting myself for things. And that's how the whole I Want to Work for Diddy thing happened. I was just like, this is the moment. So I just took action, and I wouldn't have. And I was going to acting school and I was doing my thing, but I didn't think I knew it was possible. And so then I was like, okay, we're going to do this. And it really shifted everything for me. That moment just, yeah.
I love that story. Thank you, Laverne. Candis, how does it feel to hear that story? I know you've heard it before, but I'm so curious how that sits with you.
I mean, it's amazing and mind-blowing to me that, when there was no examples for me. So when I was in that moment, I was just like dodging the slings and arrows that were happening to me. I didn't even have time to think about what was happening in the community and how this was inspiring different people. It was just like, all of a sudden this was happening, I feel so, of course, I feel blessed and honored to have been able to be in that role and to inspire everyone that was inspired by it. It's amazing. I mean, look at Laverne and her amazing career, and that's incredible. You know what I mean?
What did it take for you to have that opportunity?
Well, like Laverne, I remember saying my dream is to act and be on television, and I'm going to say yes to everything. I'm going to try to make everything work. All the calls that if you were trans, all the calls that you got were for drag roles.
Yep.
So you had to go in and you'd have to convince everyone that you're better than that drag role in this part as a trans woman. Mm. And I would book a lot of gigs that way. And then I would have meetings with the producers and the directors, and I try to teach them how to write their drag role into a trans role. Mm. And that was our reality for the first, at least 5-6 years, until, people started writing trans roles in a correct way, Mm-hmm. But I remember getting a call from Patricia Field, who was doing costumes on Dirty Sexy. And she said, Candis, Candis, there's this thing that I'm doing, and I have this role, and you should audition for the producers. And I was just like, Pat, really? That would be amazing. She's like, I don't know, you have to do it yourself. So I went in and I auditioned, and then I didn't hear anything for 2 weeks. And so I was like, oh, well, I didn't get it. I didn't even know what it was about. I didn't know how huge it was. I mean, Pat, I worked at Patricia Field. So for me, it was like my girlfriend, Pat. Yeah, she's doing Sex in the City. But, it's like my girlfriend, Pat, is doing this. It wasn't I had no idea how big it was going to be. And I went in and auditioned. I didn't hear anything. And then I auditioned. I got a call back, and I auditioned for Craig Wright. Mm. And then I didn't hear anything. And I was told later that they were really debating whether or not to cast a trans woman in this role, because at that point, there was always just cis women or men being cast for these female trans roles. And I think it was a whole big debate over there. I think I was the only trans woman that auditioned for that, actually, that role. And so it took a long time for them to let me know. But then I got the call and they were like, congratulations, you got it. I'm like, gorgeous. Okay, I have a show tonight. I have to go get ready. And, it was not even like, I had no idea until I walked into the table read and there was like Donald Sutherland and Jill Clayburgh and Billy Baldwin and Peter Krause and like all these like people you walk in and it was, I wanted to throw up. Like I literally was like,
oh my God.
And like adrenaline rush and you're like, trying to drink water. So which was weird because I was a showgirl and I've been on stage but it was an intense moment. But I walked in and Billy stood up, ran over, gave me a huge hug and was like, this is going to be the storyline of the season. And I was like, oh my God. It was just really, it was an amazing a moment. But like we were talking about, there weren't hardly any opportunities for trans women or, trans actors at all. And so it was just, it kind of started the ball rolling, but it took a while, I feel like, for people to see that role and then people start thinking, producers and directors and writers starting to think, oh, I can write. And that, television takes forever from the moment you have a concept till, the ball gets, rolls downstream. So it was a cool experience.
I always think about that dirty, sexy moment because Ugly Betty was on the air at the time as well. And Rebecca Romaine was playing a trans character on Ugly Betty. And I think about the way that both storylines were handled and both characters were killed off.
Yeah.
Both characters were killed off. And what it felt like to me at the time as a viewer, I was like, this is what I said to myself, they don't have trans writers, they don't have trans consultants, they don't know what to do with our storylines, so they just kill us.
I love that you had that thought. Because for me, I didn't even think that way. I was like, this is a total fluke and this is never happening again because we worked so hard to get any kind of recognition. So I love that you were thinking, well, let's just get some trans writers in there and make these storylines.
No, I was thinking this in 2007, 2008. And I remember the writer's strike happened and I don't know, but somehow I remember the writer's strike happened, but your show stayed for whatever reason. I was obsessed with the show, obviously. I was like, and so your show stayed on the air, but then when Carmelita was killed off, I just remember just sort of being devastated by the whole thing and just I wrote an in memoriam that I posted online and it was like it was really sad for me, but it was that show obviously changed my life. But it's interesting thinking in retrospect about how the character was handled. For the most part, I thought it was done well. I mean, it's hard we don't want to talk badly about our collaborators, but in 13 years later, how do you think Carmelita was handled? Are you happy with?
Well, it was such a major, major part on a show. First of all, I was the only one that was just guest star. I wasn't, signed as a series regular. And I was killed off in a flashback. And so that to me was really devastating because, our chemistry and our love for each other on the show was so palpable. And, I had a really good death scene. I felt like it was just I don't want to get into politics, but I feel like certain people thought, we can just dismiss this character and we'll just kill her in a flashback. No one will notice.
Well, I noticed, and it was devastating. And your character in their storyline was the only reason I watched the show. I mean, the show was fun. I did enjoy the show, but like obviously, the reason I was watching was because of you. Like I wouldn't have even probably started watching it in the first place. So I did enjoy the show. So I think,
it was such the relationship. You can't understate that relationship between you and Billy. I mean, I don't know if we've seen anything even like it since, right? You mean, I don't know if we have. Maybe one of you can, check in that. But
I don't know.
I think, it's like revisiting that history and looking at it. What was that like for you when we started making this film together to kind of, reflect on your career up to that point?
Watching Disclosure made me realize that how important each one of us in the film played to get us to where we are today as a body, working, acting, writing, producing, directing body. And it's a powerful thing. But I mean, you're talking about a whole group of people that wanted to work, that wanted to be a part of this industry, but were getting blocked in every sense. And for all of us to say, well, we have to be better, stronger, faster. We had to be like a $6 million woman or man in order to get ahead in this industry. But once we've cracked it open, the floodgates came out. And watching the show made me realize, and the after effects of watching Disclosure have made me realize that trans is just a part now of people's ideas when they're thinking about doing something, and in a positive way. Like they have this film that they can go to be educated about how to deal and see and talk with trans people. And so that's amazing. I think my career is an accumulation of all of our careers together. I mean, in 100 years, people are going to look back at this moment in time for our little trans revolution, and they're going to say, like, there was definitely a 10 to 15 year period where we as a community made strides.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those strides have to be protected. But one of the things that we really wanted to do with Disclosure is give filmmakers, casting directors, producers, writers, directors, a framework. Because so many, when you talked about, teaching people how to write trans characters, I've done that too. I mean, both the Law and Orders I booked in 2008 were drag queens, right? Like, so that has been my, literally all 3-part things I booked in 2008, because I finally had an agent, were drag parts. They were drag roles, and they were they were seeing trans women for those parts as well. And so over the years, I've experienced so many writers and directors with the best of intentions and bringing these scripts, and I'm just like, oh my God, it's a mess. And they didn't even understand how it was a mess. I remember giving notes. He was an Asian American actor who had written a script. And so he really wanted to represent, and I wanted to support him. And so he sent this script, and it was awful. And so I gave him very copious notes. He did a rewrite, and it was just like, I was like, oh, he just doesn't get it. He just didn't there was just so many layers upon layers that he just didn't get around so many things, but the whole plot sort of turned on sort of sensationalizing this trans woman's identity, and he didn't get that was a problem. And so I know that with Disclosure, that we've been able to, with Sam's brilliant vision, we've been able to lay it out for people so that it's really clear why things are, that not only that certain storylines and tropes are problematic, but why, and how they affect trans people, and how they affect how people come to know trans folks. So,
and also every storyline can be told, even if it's a problematic storyline, but in a way that's right and real. You know what I mean? And that's important. So many times people tell these stories, if it was done a better way, or they had trans people in the room with them, it would have really worked, because we live nuanced, weird lives. You know what I mean? Like the stuff that we've had to do. So yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
This would be for both of you. What can non-trans people in the industry do better to be allies? Particular actors.
For actors, I think a lot of actors are producing now, and I think asking a question about with their casting people, like, how do we diversify this cast if they have a producing role, or if you can make a suggestion. I think too, in our union, I love being a member of SAG-AFTRA. I love that our union takes care of us. And I love all the conversations around diversity and inclusion that we've been having in the union, and particularly around people with disabilities, trans folks, people of color. I think continuing to do that work, and then have it and make sure that it is starting to materialize in the projects. I think a lot of it's about too, when we negotiate contracts, we can begin to, Regina King was sort of talking about this with representation of women, that like it's beginning to insist in our contracts that we have, maybe it's a 50-50, a split in terms of gender that assumes a binary, which is problematic. But beginning to, but no, I mean, I think too, that becomes the tricky thing too, especially when we talk about gender equality. So often we talk about it becomes a binary conversation because we talk about women versus men, and then non-binary people are sort of left out. So then again, understanding the way that we have the conversation also needs to be inclusive. But then what can we begin to do in our contracts around diversity? It's tricky. I just closed a contract now for a show that we're working on, and it's hard. It's actually really hard to get to request anything, so it depends on what level of power and influence you have in terms of around insisting upon diversity as much as you can. And I think about a lot of it's about what leverage you have, and you have to, and figuring out and owning that. Because for me, I still feel like I am this act in some ways. I feel like this act in other ways not. And I feel like this actress who I just want to work, and I just want to make everybody happy, and I don't want to be difficult. And so I just want to say, yes, and just get on with things. And I don't want to be difficult. I just don't ever want to be perceived as being difficult, because I think that is the worst thing in this business. And I think if you're a Black woman, it's really not good. And if you're a Black trans woman, it's really not good. So there's a part of me that always wants to sort of overcompensate. And so I think part of that is like me not fully understanding the power I might have. And so finding a way to leverage the power that I do have in a way that is always loving and generous, and finding that balance. And I think a lot of actors are insecure as AF and are just always just like feeling, some of us are and some of us aren't, and feeling like lucky just to get a job. And so like finding ways to understand what power we do have and pushing back when we can, into pushing for diversity and pushing for like what are our crew members going to look like? Is there a fellowship program? I still haven't quite gotten there yet with I haven't produced anything since Disclosure, so we'll see. But having a fellowship program like we did on Disclosure, where we would we had a mostly trans crew, and when we couldn't find someone trans to be a crew member, we had a non-trans person train them, and all of the fellowships were paid. I think that is so fabulous. I think that is amazing. And how do we begin to cultivate talent behind the camera? And these are things that questions that actors can begin to ask, to have conversations with our representation about. When we negotiate our contracts, what can we begin to do there? When we have conversations with our directors and producers, how can we begin to really diversify not only the casting, but our crews?
Yeah, I think allies, it's also important. I was talking to Rain about this yesterday, actually. Mm-hmm. Putting trans people in decision-making positions. So you go on to a production and you actually can say, wait, stop. No, this isn't right. This isn't working. I think that's really important. And also, writers, if you are writing for trans people, listening and not being really so strict with what the words are that are on your page that the actors are supposed to say, especially if you don't know what it's like to write for a trans person.
Yeah, well, ideally now there should be trans writers in the writer's room. What I love about one of the most amazing things that I think happened.
Note to trans people, start writing.
Yes. We've been writing. We've been writing. What I love, Jill Soloway, who I think is going by a different name now. Joey Soloway on Transparent for the second season insisted on having a trans writer in that writer's room and made a big hubbub about it. And that started a conversation that needed to happen. And I really believe that the trans writer that we had on Doubt, the CBS show that I did, would not have happened if Soloway had not done that push publicly. The trans writers that worked on what was it, Tales from the City, and working on so many writers' rooms on Pose. There's several trans writers on that show. If Soloway had not done that we would not have the trans writers in writers' rooms that we have now, and the trans writers and directors who are working in the business. So I think that those kinds of moments that we push for diverse writers' rooms, it's really, really crucial. And certain actors in certain positions can make those insist on diverse writers' rooms.
So often when people watch Disclosure, they comment on, how intimate the interviews are, and it's when they ask me about that, I don't really know what to say, and so I would love to know from your perspective, why you're able and willing to go there with your stories.
I think, I think that we have a very sordid life, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I think a lot of times trans people from the beginning have stories to tell and aren't allowed to tell them, go through experience in the life that a lot of people could not even understand, especially trans women of color. They're dealing with the race issues, and on top of that, dealing with trans issues. And so it's like a quadruple pressure. So when you get intimately in front of a camera, you have something to say and you have stories that you can say. And when you're in a safe place, it's easy to be able to tell these stories and know that you're in a safe place, and you can be open and honest about your experiences. So I think for me that's the reason.
Yeah, I think what actors know more than anything is that we need safety so that we can go to the places that we have to go to in the work. And, I have a different investment in Disclosure as an executive producer of it, but being on set and hearing from so many people how amazing it was that when the first person who greeted them when they walked in was a trans person, right? That trans people were just everywhere. You look around and then there's just a sense of, I don't have to explain. I don't have to there's a lot. I mean, I still hear unfortunate stories about how trans actors are being treated on sets. Just a couple of years ago, an actress, I heard a story about a young actress who was being misgendered by crew members. Right, and she heard it, and we all know how sensitive we are when we're on set and we have to go to the place, and hearing that, how is that going to affect the work? And ideally, we cast whoever we cast, no matter who they are. We want to make sure that is the safe space, not just for actors, for everyone, so that we can go to where we have to go. And so It's so beautiful that to hear from folks that they felt Disclosure set was a safe place. And that's so important. One last thing I want to say about safety, because I feel like, there's such a sort of, it almost feels like parody when people talking about safe space, and they're like, oh, this snowflake liberal is talking about safe space. And this is what people say. And I think it's so important to point out that when we don't feel safe as human beings, so we all have a fight, flight, or freeze response. When we see a bear in the woods and we feel a threat, we go into fight, flight, or freeze. And that survival response, we release cortisol and adrenaline so we can either fight that bear or flee that bear. That is not a way to live. That is not, the only way that we can get to spaces of true resilience, of thriving and not just surviving, is that we have to feel safe. We have to feel safe so that we can be vulnerable. And if we don't feel safe, there's no way we're going to be able to be vulnerable. And that is crucial to the work that we do as actors. And so, yeah, that's crucial to the work that we do as human beings. Yes, Candis?
No, I've had a couple of situations where I've had almost a panic attack just because I didn't feel safe in a scene that I was doing in a hostile environment. And it was difficult. It was almost trauma inducing, you know what I mean? To think back at that moment, and it still gets me, fluttered and flushed and frustrated. And that should not happen to any actor, especially when you're walking onto a new set, especially when you're a trans actor.
I think the times in the 2007s, but you were doing, I remember, we're going to date ourselves. I remember I think you had a night at Crowbar in the East Village back in the day, and you had done a commercial. I'm a Candis fan. You did a commercial and you played the commercial. Correct me if I'm wrong. You played the commercial at the club, and we were like, Candis is in a commercial, and I think it was in the 90s, and we were so excited, and you played the commercial. Do you remember this?
I do. It was a nice commercial for nice banking.
I didn't even remember the commercial. I just remember Candis was in a commercial and I was so excited. So you've been doing this. So you've been doing in the business for a while, like, right? And so I'm just thinking that there was like this, I don't want to call it a dark ages, but like all of these moments of like, I just remember seeing you dead on CSI and seeing you dead on Dirty Sexy Money. And just like, it's horrible thinking about kids. I don't even want to think about kids. But that is so, that I just can't even imagine. Like I've had my moments too on sets, and I think I've been trained to just sort of get on with it. But like, do you want to share a moment or two of the dark ages of being on set and what it was like in terms of the experience?
Well, I mean, when you're on set and nobody really knows how to act or deal with you, it's you tend to shut down or do the exact opposite, overcompensate. You know what I mean? Every set that I went on to before Dirty Sexy, and some after, were slightly toxic, but not everyone. So as a trans person growing up, it's like you have your psychic energy. You know an ally. You can spook an ally from a mile away. Yeah. And when you're on set and you go right to that hair room, or you know what I mean? You know the hostile areas. It's like you living in New York, being trans, you have eyes in the back of your head. You know the allies. And so I always would just find that, but the more I worked, and then when you came out and you started, doing Orange, and then people started getting more and more roles, the conversation had started to change. Mm-hmm. And it went from hostile moments to, to grateful moments, to walking on the magician set for the first time and having this whole cast of 20-somethings run up and give me a hug and like say, I'm so excited that you're on our show. Like that was such a difference, you know what I mean?
That's amazing. That's amazing. I think what is interesting to me is that I think a lot about the work that we have to do as actors, producers in our business to make sure that our workplaces are safe across the board, but how so much of my mentality growing up is that you get on with it, you figure it out, that like what I heard from what you just said is that like, okay, this might be hostile, but I'm going to figure it out. And I think that young people should hear this. I think that like, yes, we need to do all the work we can to make sure everything is safe and that people can thrive in any workplace environment. But at the end of the day, we cannot be deterred. When we have work to do as artists and that director says action, we cannot let anything keep us from doing what we have to do. And when I hear you finding your allies, and finding ways to survive and navigate sets. And I think about what I've done and the things that I've had to sort of endure, but never let anything get in the way of the work. No. And because there's something bigger, there's always something bigger. And so that and we don't even know it. And I think what is so beautiful about hearing you talk so sort of unassuming about your career is that you didn't even fully know that it was bigger than you. But it was, and it is absolutely incredible that that you exist and that you continue to work and inspire us and kill it. And
it's incredible that you both exist.
Likewise.
Love sharing space with both of you. I want to ask one last question, Laverne, from your sort of EP hat, and in helping me structure the film. And then I would love to hear from Candis, like as when you actually got to see it, your reactions to this structure. Laverne, you and I were, so diligent about not demonizing anybody, bringing nuance, and in particular, we bookend the film with, clips of Oprah, right? To like show her evolution. And within the film, we show Ryan Murphy's evolution. Can you talk about why that was so important?
That was crucial for me because I think that this whole sort of cancel culture that we exist in now doesn't give people a space to transform and to be transformed. And again, you have to have safe space to do that. And I think about, a huge Oprah Winfrey fan. I live for Oprah, and Oprah literally has changed my life. But in my research over the years, I've watched a lot of, problematic Oprah interviews with trans people over the years. And then seeing that moment with Janet Mock on Super Soul Sunday, I just get shivers from it. And it was really beautiful. And I think that the message is that no one should be thrown away. No one is to be canceled. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. And that we all don't know something, and we all are going to make a mistake and say the wrong thing or not get something right. But how beautiful it is to have an opportunity to get it right. How beautiful it is to have an opportunity to be transformed. What Ryan Murphy is doing at Pose and all of his other shows. I mean, like what he's doing with Janet Mock's career, it's amazing. She's not just working on Pose, she's directing he's just become her mentor. It's absolutely beautiful. And it's her presence behind the scenes as a director, producer, writer is changing the industry. And so we cannot throw people away. We have to love and embrace people. And I think when we can have conversations with love and empathy, and I hope disclosure it was a way to facilitate that, then we can all come together. Because I don't think, some people do have malicious intent, right? But artists, I know most of us as artists just want to tell human stories, and we want to get it right. And so for me, I want to just embrace and love. And I said to express this to you, and I think we've done it in our film, and I'm really, really proud of that.
Yeah, I think you have too. It was, I had no idea what to expect. You go in and you film this, and then oh, can you make this? And I can't come because I'm doing this. And then I'm like, finally I see it. And I was really, really pleasantly surprised because it hits you in the face. And when you're in this industry and you're just trooping along and you're doing your auditions, you don't realize how important a film like Disclosure is for who you're auditioning for to see. And I mean, I have already been approached by, I'm working on a couple of projects right now, which I think have to do with just the visibility of Disclosure and people saying, we have to be, allies and listen and work with the trans community more, and how important it is. So I think you guys did a good job.
Thank you. And I think everyone needs to understand too that Candice Cayne is a living legend, and that she should be on all of our TV screens, giving us life. So let's. I
love you so much, Laverne. That's so sweet.
Yeah, the last clip of Disclosure is of Candis, and it's one of the clips we didn't label because it wasn't on there long enough, and I get endless asks of what's that clip? So we've been promoting that show, The Magicians, which is a beautiful moment. Well, I adore you both. This is a great place to wrap it up. I'm so glad we got to spend this time together.
I adore you too.
Thank you. You're endlessly inspiring to me and millions of people. So thank you for all you do in the world. And thank you, SAG.
Thank you, SAG-AFTRA. Thank you, SAG Foundation.
Thank you.